everybody. I'm just going to check that my audio is coming through okay. Got 43 people arrived. I'm just going to give it a few minutes just to make sure we get everybody in from our lobby. And just as people join us, saying a very warm welcome this afternoon to this further webinar. I'm just going to give it again another one minute or so just to make sure we don't start before everyone has arrived. Right, I make it 1 minute past 4, which I think gives everyone a minute to get in over our start time. A very good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on this tea time session. Today's number 3 of 4 webinars, which is hosted by ourselves here at the Department for Education and with our colleagues at the Youth Endowment Fund. My name is Alison Wilson. I think I joined you on the last webinar as well, but for those of you I've not met yet, I'm a regional director in the Department for Education, and I'm up in the Yorkshire and Humber region. I would argue it's the best region in the country, but others are available too. I'm really delighted to be hosting these webinars. This subject's very, close to our heart here in this region, and I know right around the country, lots of our colleagues are grappling with some of the issues that we're going to touch on today. So I'm really pleased to be here with you. I'm really delighted as well that we've got Joe Collin from YEF and his colleague Ben Lorraine, who are both on screen with cameras on. If you'd like to give a wave, Joe and Ben, you're going to be doing all the heavy lift today in taking us through the slides, but we're really delighted and thank you for your time in coming along today. So the topics that we're covering today, preventing violence in education settings, are really important topics, and I think you'll be here today because you think this matters to you and to your setting and you want to learn more about it, and we're really delighted that you've joined us today. We're going to record this session and we've recorded the other 2, and we'll record the final 4th session, so they'll be available to the wider system. And please do encourage your colleagues' networks to have a look at them if you've not managed to make it to today's session. Taking an evidence-informed approach is super important. We can all go out there and do lots of things, and we can put energy and resource into lots of things, but it's so much better, isn't it, if we know we're trying safe bets, things that other people have done before that have a strong evidence base behind them, so that all of that energy, passion and focus is channeled in the best direction we can possibly take. And I think what we'll learn today is obviously some of that evidence base is still growing, and there's still things that we don't know lots about, but where we have that evidence, it's really important that we harness it, particularly in this agenda where children's lives and lives of others are being harmed by what goes on through serious violence. Today's focus is on social emotional skills development, and again it's part of our series. I think it's really important to recognise that this week we've published the school's white paper, and within that there is lots of what we talk about, and you may not have had time yet to fully digest everything in there, but what we're going to talk about today really links to some of the things that we've been talking about in that white paper, Every Child Achieving and Thriving. That paper sets out the government's ambition for an inclusive and enriching experience for children in which they can thrive. And the themes that are in the white paper are really things that we're going to be discussing in this webinar today. Inclusion for children and young people who've been sidelined. We use the word sidelined, and I think that will come up in some of the discussion today. Helping children to move from being withdrawn to being engaged, and rebuilding a belief in the power of education to change a child's life. So really lots of the things that we've put into this week's published white paper, I think, are going to be really resonating with the conversation and the information that you're going to see and hear today. Helping children to feel safe and connected to their schools, really important themes across a number of the chapters within the white paper. So the purpose of this series really is to support you in adopting proven practice, reducing children and young people's involvement in violence, and sharing that best practice and approach. And that's something that we are trying to do much more of across the system, bringing people together, convening groups like this to talk about and share experience. In doing so, we're going to introduce some practical tools, the EPIC self-assessment, to help senior leaders reflect on current and school level strategies to identify and increase impact even further. So we'll talk a lot more about that. And as I say, this is the third of 4, which are running every 6 to 8 weeks. And will be another session, which I'll talk about at the end, that's coming along. The session that we started with, the first session back in November, an introduction to evidence-informed practice. And again, if you've missed that one, it's all online and you can catch up with it on the YouTube links that we'll share. And then we had further sessions following on from that, with Arc Globe from Southwark in London contributing to a session as well, which again is recorded. So I'm going to just pause there because we need to get into today's main event. So I'm delighted to introduce Jo first, who's going to start, and then Ben will come on halfway through to pick up from Jo. So Jo, over to you, and thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll let you get on with the content of today's webinar.
Fantastic, thanks Alison. And yeah, good afternoon everyone. My name's Jo Collin. I'm the Head of Guidance and Reporting here at the YEF. As Alison said, I'm also joined by my fantastic colleague Ben Lorraine, who'll talk to you a bit later in the session about the EPIC tool. Before I just get into the content of the session, I know you're all eagerly awaiting it and very excited about how to develop social emotional skills in your context. Just to do a very brief intro to who we are at the YEF. I know that not all of you will have been in sessions 1 and 2. But the Youth Endowment Fund, we are the What Works Centre for Preventing Children's Involvement in Violence. So education colleagues will be very familiar with the EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation, a What Works Centre I used to work at before joining YEF. And whereas EEF's goal is to close the attainment gap between children on free school meals and their more affluent counterparts, YEF is set to be in exactly the same way, but we have a different goal, and that goal is to prevent children's involvement in violence. So we use all the same methods that the EEF use, randomised control trials. We have our own toolkit that I'd recommend having a look at. But the difference to EEF is we work across 7 different sectors, one of which is education. And across those sectors, we produce guidance reports. And I'm going to be talking to you about the findings of one of those guidance reports, our Education Practice Guidance Report, today. Before I get into that, though, it's always really important, and Alison alluded to this at the start of the session, and it's just always really important to contextualise why we exist, why we're doing this session, and I'm sure why a lot of you have joined today, and that is the impact that violence has on children's lives. So every year in November, we publish what's called the CVV, the Children Violence and Vulnerability Survey. It's the largest survey of its kind in the country, most possibly in the world, actually. And we survey 10 to 11,000 13 to 17-year-olds, so teenagers. We survey them every year. And we ask them questions about their experience of violence and a whole host of other related questions. 20%, 1 in 5 of those children, say that they were victims of violence in the last year. Then if we think about specific forms of violence, of the 13 to 17-year-olds who are in romantic relationships, half of them report experiencing violent or controlling behaviours within those relationships. That's really staggering. Then if we think about the support that is provided to children who are involved in repeat incidents of violence that lead to physical injury, only 12% of them report receiving support. after that violence happens. So here we see, violence is prevalent, and we're not always getting the support right for those children who are involved in it. We shouldn't therefore be surprised that given the prevalence of violence, it's going to be impacting education. Two-thirds of children, two-thirds of those 11,000 13 to 17-year-olds that we survey, say that they worry about being a victim of violence. Now, what that does is it has an impact on children's education. 10% of all teenage children in England said that they skipped school due to a fear of violence last year. Now, attendance rightly continues to be a real focus of the Department for Education, of policy, of schools, of colleges, of alternative provision settings across the country. And here we can see that violence is a contributing factor that's stopping children going to school. But also we know that, violence impacts children's mental health, it impacts their sleep, their appetite, impacts their concentration. And 22%, nearly a quarter of children say that the fear of violence impacts those things for them. And again, we can really see, I used to be a history teacher, we can really see as educators, if a child is turning up, their mental health is struggling, if they're not sleeping very well, if they're not eating very well, if they can't concentrate, of course, that's going to impact their education. What then compounds that challenge is, despite that prevalence and some of those challenges that we have there, we're not equipping the vast majority of teachers to support children and support children to prevent their involvement in violence. So we partner with Teacher Tap every year, and we ask questions to around 10,000 teachers. 7 in 10 teachers told us last year that they didn't feel confident or that they were not confident or not at all confident identifying or delivering evidence-based violence prevention interventions. Now, I need to be really clear here. We're not blaming teachers for this at all. As I said, I used to be a teacher myself. There are lots of things on my agenda, lots of things on my list of things to do. And this, of course, wasn't always at the top of that. And critically, I wasn't trained on it. We also asked teachers last year, what proportion have been trained on how to prevent children's involvement in serious violence. 82% of teachers, and perhaps even more surprisingly, 72% of designated safeguarding leads have received no training on serious violence in the last 2 years. So want to be really clear here, none of this is intending at all to blame teachers. This is a societal issue affecting children and affecting society in general, and we need to better equip teachers. There's also some really good news here, and particularly good news if we're working in education settings. And that's that education settings are really uniquely placed to protect children from involvement in violence. We know that the vast majority of children, 82% of children in that CVV survey, feel safe at school. Schools provide safe, trusted spaces for children. They also offer a variety of evidence-informed interventions. We'll talk about some of those today, but we've spoken about them as well in sessions 1 and 2. So we spoke in the last webinar on the provision of mentoring and targeted sports provision. We'll talk today about relationship violence prevention activities or anti-bullying programs. These are evidence-based interventions that schools can deliver that protect children. And of course, you won't need me to tell you that schools play a really critical role in safeguarding children. Schools, colleges, and alternative provision settings are really uniquely placed, and they're the one setting that all children should be in. And so they offer a fantastic opportunity to spot, early warning signs where a child might be at risk, and provide much needed support or signposting to specialist support. So there is some good news here. And given the sort of unique place that education settings, so schools, colleges, and AP settings across the country occupy, we were really keen to make the best use of the available evidence to provide some evidence-based recommendations on what schools, colleges, and AP should do to protect children involved in violence. These settings are in this position, so let's equip them to the best of our ability. And there's also a wealth of evidence available that can support us to do that. In exactly the same way that EEF have really fantastically brought to bear all of the evidence on how to improve attainment, we've spent since 2018 putting the evidence together on how to prevent children's involvement in violence. And for schools, we've arrived at 5 evidence-based recommendations. Keep children and young people in education, provide trusted adults, develop social and emotional skills, target efforts at the places and times where violence occurs, and cautiously consider unproven strategies and avoid harmful approaches. Now, we've done 1 and 2 in webinars 1 and 2. And today we're going to focus on that third one around developing social and emotional skills. I've said this before, but the sort of eagle-eyed amongst you will notice often what people say to us when we share this slide is, well, yeah, Obviously, we're doing a lot of that already, which is fantastic, which is brilliant. What makes a good evidence-based recommendation is something that's feasible, something that's actually deliverable. And actually, what a lot of what I will share today, you'll be familiar with, but it's about, right, how can we target that at the right children? How can we implement that to the best standards so that we're protecting children? So just moving on then specifically to that recommendation 3 and the topic of conversation today around developing children's social and emotional skills. Why is this important? So in that CVV survey, this one that we do every year, 3 years ago, when we had a slightly smaller version of the survey, we asked 7,500 children. We asked amongst that group of children, amongst children who'd admitted perpetrating violence, why? What was the reason why you perpetrated violence? Now, what you can see really interestingly amongst the reasons here is how prominently a child's social and emotional skills features here. So we look across all of the responses, as I say, from people who've admitted to perpetrating robbery, physical assault, or a weapons offence. Being provoked through baiting or retaliation were the most common reasons for committing acts of violence. 7 in 10 children who perpetrated violence said that they did so because they were provoked. Now, what we can see there, that is all about a child's social and emotional skills, right? It's all about their ability to regulate their emotions, to take a moment to take a deep breath, to pause before reacting, to develop better relationships with their peers. So really, really critical that we focus on the reasons why children report to us that they're engaging in violence. And so that leads us, amongst other things, amongst the accompanying evidence base that I'll come on to make this recommendation in our education practice guidance. A really important way that we can protect children from involvement in violence is by developing children's social and emotional skills. The evidence shows that social and emotional skills training programs reduce children's involvement in crime by 32%. They also reduce children's aggression by 28%. This is an evidence-based strategy that we can use. Now, I'm going to come on to talk about those 4 specific recommended actions in turn. And they focus on universal curricular and targeted approaches, relationship violence reduction sessions, implementing anti-bullying strategies and programs within schools, and providing, where possible, support and access to therapy. But before I do so, I just want to start, I think really important in this area, with some definitions. I think often we can hear social emotional skills and they become quite difficult to pin down. So I just want you to take a moment to just have a read of these 5 key social and emotional skill competencies. We've taken these from the EEF. These are very well established. I want you to take a moment to read them. Their definitions and the associated skills. Take 2 minutes to have a read. Okay, then. So, I mean, what you can see here, so from these 5 key competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making, and then particularly the associated skills, is how associated these are with preventing children's involvement in violence, right? So, if we look at self-awareness, the importance of identifying emotions. If we look at self-management, the importance of impulse control, stress management, self-discipline. If we look at social awareness, the critical importance of understanding emotions, expressing empathy, having respect for others, responsible decision making, taking ethical responsibility. I could go on. These are all so intertwined with the decisions that children make, And often the decisions they'll make in the moment, and when we think about those reasons why children perpetrate violence, become involved in violence, preventing them from feeling like they need to respond after being provoked or baited. These are really key skills that we must develop. The other thing to underline is that these are not just important for violence reduction, and I'm just going to underline here how these are also embedded throughout lots of different types of DfE guidance. So the first is that we're really excited and absolutely delighted by the new RSHE guidance that was published last year that will come in from September of this year in schools in England, and it really explicitly sets out secondary children should learn how to develop key social and emotional skills that will increase people's safety from involvement in conflict and violence. And it then goes on to list those 5 skills and very explicitly makes that link. If you protect children by developing these skills, you've got a better chance of keeping them safe from involvement in violence, which is fantastic. And the second bullet point that I'll come on to there later in the session as well around safety within relationships and how to embed that. So it's fantastic that that's in there, and there'll be a really imperative on schools to lean into these skills even more, because they are already doing that well. But it's also features in the pupil premium guidance. So as you know, pupil premium is there for schools to spend on attainment, for schools to spend on supporting children who are eligible for free school meals and making sure they're closing the attainment gap between those children and their more affluent counterparts. But the pupil premium guidance makes really clear that there's real flexibility in what schools spend that on, and there's a recognition and acknowledgement in that guidance that there are wider strategies that can underpin efforts to improve attainment that aren't just about tutoring, for instance. It sets out a menu of approaches in the pupil premium guidance that schools can spend their pupil premium money on, and within that menu of approaches, there's a section at the end called wider strategies. And that very explicitly includes supporting people's social, emotional, and behavioural needs. So it's really important, you don't just need to see this as a violence reduction initiative or intervention. Developing children's social and emotional skills is what all good schools should be doing, and it comes with that added benefit of also supporting children's attainment. I've also included the wider list of wider strategies there because you can see some of the other things that we've covered in other sessions around supporting attendance, providing extracurricular activities like sports, and breakfast clubs and meal provision that we also mentioned in the last webinar. But also, just to further that point, the EEF are also really clear on this in their toolkit. Delivering social and emotional learning programs and interventions has an impact on children's attainment. It's a moderate impact, very low cost based on moderate evidence. I'd also really direct particularly colleagues that work in a primary context towards the EEF's guidance report on developing social emotional skills in primary schools. It's fantastic. It's really, really good. And a lot of particularly the wider school strategies that I'll come on to talk to, we have drawn from there. So that's just sort of putting into context, right? What are these skills? And just more generally in the system, why they're really important. But in terms of why they're important to us at YF and the specific things that we'd hope schools, colleges and AP settings deliver to better protect children from involvement in violence, we can see here that the image at the top is from our own YF toolkit, and it summarises the evidence relating to social skills training, and it sets out that we have once you look across all of the evidence, the average impact is a high estimated impact on violent crime, and we also see that it has a high increase on children's self-regulation. As I've also said, social skills training reduces children's aggression by 28%. So what should schools do about it? There are 3 specific things here. The first is to deliver a universal and safe social and emotional skills curriculum. Now, SAFE there is an acronym. What we mean by that, and again, this is drawing from really well-established guidance and previous EEF guidance, is schools should be very explicitly teaching those 5 social and emotional skills and competencies that I set out, and they should do so in a way that's sequence in a coordinated way that breaks down complicated skills into smaller steps, should be active to enable children to practice and rehearse new skills, should be really focused with specific sessions allocated to specific skills, and as I said at the outset there, should be explicit. You can name these skills. You can name them to children, you can name them to parents, you should name them to staff and be really explicit about what's being taught. And what we know from the evidence is that we've tested ourselves and EEF have tested different universal social emotional skill programs, and they've shown an impact on outcomes that we're very interested in. So one such example is a program called Dare 25. We funded the delivery of this program from 2020 to 2022, and they come in and they deliver a trained external Dare officer from an organisation called Life Skills Education. Comes in and they deliver 10 sessions to year 6 children, and they focus on a variety of social and emotional skills. So they focus on how to deal with stressful situations, how to deal with peer pressure, and they deliver role play, discussion groups, writing exercises, and various different activities. We funded what's called a randomized control trial on Dare 25 in 121 schools in England. So half of the schools received the program, half of them didn't. The children in Dare 25 schools who received the programme reported slightly lower levels of behavioural or emotional difficulty than their counterparts who didn't. And that's only after 10 weeks, right? Like if you're embedding this into your curriculum, into your universal offer for children, we can really see how that can support the development of their skills. We know that reducing behavioural and emotional difficulty will protect children from later involvement in violence. In terms of a secondary example, a really fantastic one is Healthy Minds. So Healthy Minds, which is delivered by an organisation called Bounce Forward, is a really interesting programme where Bounce Forward professionals come in and train teachers to deliver their PSHE curriculum for in schools to year 7 to 10 children. They provide a 14-module PSHE curriculum, and it covers a range of different topics like substance misuse and healthy relationships and what healthy relationships looks like. Again, a randomized control trial was conducted on Healthy Minds in 34 schools over 5 years, and children who received the program had better behavior, lower levels of absence, and there were fewer exclusions amongst children who were eligible for free school meals. All of these randomized control trials, which are the gold standard of evaluation, the most robust form of evaluation, also come with a qualitative element that looks at the implementation and process behind delivery. And that IPE evaluation found that teachers viewed the program really positively. They found it well structured, really relevant, and had lots of useful content. Now, I'm not saying go and do these exact programs. What I'm saying here is that there's clear evidence that a universal offer where you're explicitly teaching social and emotional skills has an impact on children's behaviour, has an impact on their absence, can have an impact on reducing exclusions. These are all things that we know will better protect children from involvement in violence. But of course, there'll be some children that also need some additional support. So alongside that universal offer, some children will need, an extra bit of targeted support to develop their social and emotional skills. If you work in a school, if you're a school leader, a head of year, a designated safeguarding lead, a pastoral lead, you will know who these children are. These are children who may have been suspended on numerous occasions. They may be children who are, struggling with relationships with their peers. They may be children who, had previous contact with the police or who you're worried about. And what we recommend from the evidence and what we recommend in the practice guidance is providing additional targeted support to these children. Now, you can do that either by identifying an internal staff member, and there are so many fantastic staff members in schools that can do this really well, or working with an external organisation to deliver one-to-one or small group sessions that are delivered weekly for a minimum of 1 term. Of course, seek to minimise, the risk of losing lots of learning from lessons. So think about when you can deliver them, whether that's lunchtime or immediately after school. And a really impactful and cost-effective thing that you can also do is combine them with other interventions that you might be delivering. So maybe you're delivering a sports program and you can tack on, right, we're going to have some additional targeted social and emotional development work. And there are some fantastic organisations out there that do that. We're funding an organisation at the moment called Delalio Rugby Works that's doing exactly that in alternative provision. And we don't know if it works yet. We're testing them by a randomized control trial, but a really good example of tying together existing provision and interventions and tagging onto that some social and emotional skills provision. A really good example of this, which has fantastic evidence behind it, is a program called Becoming a Man. Now, again, I'm not saying go and do the specific program, but hopefully it gives a bit of inspiration for the kind of thing that we know works. So this is a really interesting initiative that was initially delivered in Chicago that supports Key Stage 3 and 4 boys to develop their social and emotional skills. So why we're so interested in this is that a causal randomized control trial evaluation in Chicago, it showed an impact on reducing children's arrests and on reducing their involvement in violence. And we've now tested the feasibility of this intervention. We haven't tested the impact of it yet. We're hoping to do that potentially in future, but we've tested the feasibility of it in schools in England, and it was feasible and it was deliverable. And it delivers weekly group sessions in schools to 8 to 12 boys. And it delivers 50 of those over a course of 2 years from a BAM, becoming a man, counsellor. And sessions include some real explicit teaching of some of those social emotional skills that I mentioned, and they do that via a variety of different methods, role plays, lectures, stories, discussions, videos. And at the core of it is some core principles, such as integrity, respect for women, positive anger expression, that are really at the centre of the curriculum. So again, not saying do this exact program, but it gives a sense of some of the targeted interventions that have been shown in the evidence to have an impact on violence and offending. The final thing that it's really important to do, beyond just what happens in the classroom or what happens in targeted interventions, is whole school strategies more generally. And there are things that you can do across a setting, whether it be that school, college, and AP setting, to really embed some of these skills. So delivering assemblies focused on specific skills, this often happens really well at a primary level, and we can learn a lot from that. Noticing and praising children when they exhibit skills across your setting. Training teachers how to model them. As an interesting example here, if you interrupt an argument in the playground, right, how could you model a skill there on, right, how do we calm down? How do we listen to someone else's perspective? How do we take a moment to compose ourselves without reacting? Consider providing areas on site where children can cool off and calm down and problem solve. Really critical, children spend most of their time not at school. Informing parents and carers of those 5 skills and being really explicit about them so that they can work on them with their children. So that's the first part of this recommendation, about explicitly targeting those social emotional skills. The second of 4 parts of this recommendation is relationship violence prevention lessons and activities. And again, we've taken this from our toolkit, and this is an increasingly prominent and important area of our work. It's really shot to prominence this over the last year, partly due to adolescence, and the huge international attention that was on that. And while that was a fiction, we know that, and I'll come on to in a moment some of the stats behind it, but we know this is increasing an issue facing teachers and schools, but also the government's mission to halve violence against women and girls within a decade. There's a real focus on this as a topic, which is fantastic because it's so needed. So on the left-hand side there, you can just about make out some of the stats that we have from our Children Violence and Vulnerability Survey, where we survey children on their experiences of violence. As I said at the outset, half of children who are involved in a romantic relationship report violent or controlling behaviours. 31% of those children report physical or sexual violence. That includes 20% of children who report that they were pressured into doing something. These are really shocking statistics, and we should be shocked by them. We should be surprised, and we should be motivated into action. Despite this, not enough children are receiving critical support in schools to address this. So only 40% of those teenage children that we surveyed said that they've received lessons on how to be in healthy and respectful romantic relationships. All children should be receiving that. And we think part of the challenge here, again, is that we shouldn't be putting the blame on teachers. A big part of the issue is that teachers are often not trained on how to deliver these sessions. So nearly a third, 31% of secondary teachers who deliver PSHE or RSHE have never been trained on how to do so. That's really staggering. These are really difficult topics, really difficult lessons to manage. The behaviour management in those sessions can be really challenging. And some of the content is really difficult as well. So it's really important that we better support teachers. But again, there's a real message of hope here. And that's a message of hope that we get from the evidence. So that the evidence is clear that what we call dating and relationship violence prevention activities can reduce children's involvement in this type of violence by 17%. What I mean by that, in terms of what those activities are a wide variety of things. So they include things like education and awareness sessions, where in those sessions we might be reading or listening to stories about dating relationship violence and really challenging myths and norms relating to it. reflection and discussion activities, awareness campaigns, including posters, films, leaflets, and newsletters across schools, edits to behaviour policies to really stress how important this is for a setting. Training for staff is really critical. One of the key things that often stops schools from doing this well is a perception amongst the staff that this doesn't happen here. It happens everywhere, and that's not an indictment on schools. It's a societal problem, and so we really need to lean into that. There's also often, and this comes through really clearly in the implementation evidence, a worry from schools, where schools think, I don't want to advertise all the work I'm doing on this because it implies to parents and prospective parents that I might have a problem in my school with this. Again, it's a problem everywhere. It's much better to lean into it and do it well, and do some of that prevention activity well. Another thing that can be done, and I'll come on to talk about this when we get to anti-bullying, is increasing staff presence in hotspot areas. So do you know there are particular areas in school where relationship violence and violence generally is happening, and let's really target staff attention to those areas. In terms of why these activities work, there's several mechanisms. So they challenge unhealthy norms and dispel myths about what a healthy relationship looks like. They can improve and again, explicitly improve children's social and emotional learning skills. And really critically, they can support the identification of early warning signs, red flags in relationships, so that if a child, while they're a child or as they get older, is in a toxic relationship, they can notice early on, actually, that's a red flag. Or if their friend is in one of those relationships, they can spot that and look to reach out to an adult for support. Very concretely, in terms of what this means in a school, college, or AP setting, the best thing that settings can do is deliver at least 5 relationship violence prevention lessons to year 9 children and 16 to 17-year-olds in colleges. Now, we've been very specific on the number there. There's nothing specific in the evidence that points us to that number. The reason why we said 5 relationship violence reduction sessions is because what is clear, particularly from the implementation evidence, particularly from our surveying with teachers, 46% of the 10,000 teachers we surveyed last year said that one of the key things stopping them doing this well was time on the curriculum. So we've said 5 because we really want a minimum standard. And this, of course, sits in a whole curriculum of RSHE. But it's really critical that we're really, getting this content in there and teaching it to children. And of course, making sure, and this comes on later in the slide here, all the content that we're teaching is age appropriate, of course. And so, make sure you're deferring really closely to the RSHE guidance there. What's really critical in terms of implementation is recruiting session leaders who can confidently deliver the sessions. What you don't want to do is just pick a random teacher and say, good luck, you're doing these sessions next week. These are difficult sessions to deliver, and the main thing that has an impact on whether they work or not is the expertise and the confidence of the deliverer. So if you've got that internally, great. If you've got a bit of confidence and a bit of enthusiasm from a staff member internally, great. Let's then get them some more training. And there are also some fantastic external deliverers out there that can deliver some of this as well. I've mentioned already tackling that perception that violence isn't a problem here, and the importance of reinforcing the messages across the setting, whether it's in behaviour policies, assemblies, awareness campaigns. The penultimate strategy here to develop children's social and emotional skills is anti-bullying programmes. Now, the evidence for the impact of anti-bullying programs shows that delivering evidence-based anti-bullying programs has a low impact on violent crime. However, it has a moderate impact in reducing bullying perpetration. And we know that children who have bullied others or are involved in bullying are more likely to become involved in crime and violence. So this makes this a good bet. If you're delivering anti-bullying programs in your school, college, or AP setting, you are more likely to protect children from later involvement in violence. And there's some really good evidence-based programs that have been delivered in the UK on anti-bullying that have been tested by randomized controlled trials. And I'll come on to an example of one shortly. But what they say is that when delivering these programs, you should do a variety of things. You consult children. Understand, right, what are the specific parameters and contexts in relation to bullying in your school? Are there particular areas of school where bullying happens, or maybe particular school travel routes where children are traveling to and from school where it's happening? Are there particular types of bullying that's happening? Understand the context, speak to children, speak to staff, co-construct a strategy and a solution. Lead from the top, and leading from the top in what that strategy is then really important. Making sure you have an anti-bullying strategy that is embedded into a whole setting behaviour policy, and really showing how that aligns with the school's ethos is really key. train staff, and you can do that via, providing lesson plans for PSHE, but also, as I've said a couple of times now, targeting hotspots where violence and bullying might be happening in school. So, if you're a teacher on break duty, where is it most useful for me to stand to try and reduce the likelihood that that might be happening? And again, really critically involving parents, communicating the anti-bullying policy and approach to them to really give confidence in the settings approach to it. As I alluded to there, so a really fantastic example of an evidence-based anti-bullying programme is an evaluation that the Education Endowment Foundation conducted and published in 2018. It's a programme called Inclusive, also called Learning Together. It's a whole school anti-bullying programme that's been delivered in secondary schools. It includes anti-bullying training for staff, and it's also paired with the social and emotional skills curriculum. So, clearly really relevant for this recommendation. One of the really interesting things is that this intervention starts with action groups, where a school will get together a number of children with staff, and they'll talk about, right, what is bullying like in our school? What is our action plan to address it? How are we all moving in the right direction? And then they deliver that strategy across a setting. The randomised control trial that was delivered in schools across England showed that schools that delivered Learning Together not only exhibited lower levels of bullying after 3 years, which is really interesting if we consider, the prolonged impact of an intervention, but it also improved attainment. So again, as I said at the outset, there are lots of reasons to do this stuff. And even if you're not as interested in violence reduction, there's such an imperative to deliver these interventions just to improve children's attainment and a wide variety of other outcomes. The final part of this recommendation that I'm going to come on to on a really key part of developing social emotional skills is cognitive behavioural therapy. So I've spoken about some more obvious strategies by which schools develop children's social emotional skills, by curriculum, by their targeted interventions, by whole school strategies that you can deliver, anti-bullying programs, and RSHE and relationship violence prevention. This is a less obvious one, but it's really important nonetheless. So I'm sure lots of colleagues will be familiar, but CBT is a talking therapy which helps people recognise and manage negative thoughts and behaviours. And you can see, when we're thinking about the reasons why children perpetrate violence, how this might work. You're really challenging those negative thought patterns and those thinking errors and diverting children away from committing violent offences. We know from the evidence that it's associated with a high impact on reducing children's involvement in violence. The challenge is capacity in the system. Only 10% of schools tell us that they're doing this, and we're not blaming the 90% who aren't, of course. We know that the challenges that are facing children and young people's mental health services, but there are schools that are taking novel and innovative approaches to address that. So there are schools that are partnering with local charitable and third sector organisations to deliver therapy to children that need it. Or employing their own mental health specialists and therapists across settings can be really impactful. Making use of mental health support teams in schools can also be a really good way to do this. These are often used to target therapy towards children who are anxious and depressed. Really valuable. But also think about, right, what if a child's just been suspended? What if they're struggling with a relationship with the peers? CBT can be really impactful there. So I've taken you through a whistle-stop tour of how to develop social emotional skills to prevent children's involvement in violence. I'll now pass over to Ben, who will take us through the EPIC tool on this.
So just before Ben jumps in, I should have just reminded our colleagues that if you have questions you'd like to pose as you hear things, please do submit them, and then we'll come to questions at the end. But Ben, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks both. So we've now heard about a range of different strategies and interventions on social and emotional skills, and hopefully some of the discussion has led to reflection on what's happening in your setting. But for the final part of the presentation, we wanted to just run a short self-reflection exercise on the practice that's happening, and then introduce you to a self-assessment tool that we've developed. So I'm going to pose 4 questions to you today, and I'd like for you to think about whether that practice is happening across your setting with a scoring of never, rarely, sometimes, often, and always. And the first question to you is, are the teachers who deliver PSHE or RSHE trained on how to teach social and emotional learning skills? The second question, do you train staff on how to identify and respond to bullying? The third, do trained internal staff or specialist external staff provide lessons to secondary age children each year on what healthy romantic relationships look like? And the fourth, do trained staff provide relationship violence reduction sessions to secondary age children? So just to explain that those four questions are a part of the online self-assessment tool that we've developed for colleagues that have previously joined some of the calls. You might remember us introducing the tool to you. It's a free online self-assessment tool with 37 questions intended to have you kind of reflect on the violence prevention practice that's happening. Critically, the tool provides you with a personalized and downloadable insights report that's kind of filled with tangible actions for you to take away and think about areas where if your violence prevention practice that's doing well, and perhaps areas of development. And I'll move on to kind of a takeaway task in a minute. But we know that schools over the next couple of months will start to plan for the next academic year. And we do feel that the tool and the insights report that's generated from it can really help you to just steer you to think about what are some of the actions, what are some of the strategies that you can be bringing in with a focus on violence prevention. But interestingly, we have already had close to 250 schools complete a self-assessment. So I just wanted to share some of the responses to give you an opportunity to perhaps benchmark yourself against some of the schools. Just to explain, generally within these bar graphs, the green represents where practice is happening always or often. So dark green is always, light green is often, and the red is never, the orange is rarely. So the more green is generally indicative of practice being delivered widely, and the more red and orange is indicative of practice not being delivered as much. So when we've asked leaders whether or not they're training staff on how to identify and respond to bullying, 82% of schools have indicated that they are always or often delivering this, which is a positive picture. I still would argue there's room for development for the schools that are not doing this. But compared to some of the others, this is an area that's scoring quite well across schools across both England and Wales. When we've asked whether or not teachers are receiving training to teach social and emotional skills, we've had 61% of schools indicate that they are often or always delivering this, which actually, Joe, is interestingly slightly at odds with the teacher TAP survey that we've put out. But I would argue that the teacher TAP survey that's gone out to close to 10,000 teachers might perhaps paint a more accurate picture. Interestingly, for the final two, that's where we start to see a real drop in what is being delivered. So when we've asked school leaders whether or not healthy romantic relationship lessons are being delivered, only 57% have indicated that it's often or always happening. 10% of the schools have indicated that it's never happening in their setting. And that increases for relationship violence reduction sessions. There in the final line of the bar graph, you can see there 38% of schools have indicated that it's never or rarely offered to their students. So these are all strategies that we really recommend as a school, but as we can see from the data, it's not necessarily happening at the moment. So we would love to, just as a takeaway task, invite you to complete a self-assessment. As I mentioned, you will receive a free insights report that's very personalized to the responses that you give. We've included a QR code and a link there from the slides that will be distributed after. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to email us. The emails are within the slides. But I will pass back to colleagues now for the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Ben. And I think there's a really nice offer there, isn't it, of that free report if you complete that. So a takeaway for colleagues. We've had a couple of pre-submitted questions, so I'm going to pick those up first. But colleagues, do submit any questions you'd like to ask Joe or Ben arising from the material they've covered today. So the first question, Joe, I think you've covered a bit of this in what you've talked about, but perhaps you could expand on it. Is there an evidence base for group-based interventions around social and emotional skills development for children in contact with youth justice services and or already thought to be involved in violence or crime? Do you want to pick that one up first, and then we'll go for the next question?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and the answer is a resounding yes. And so a lot of what I've spoken about actually has greatest impact when it's targeted towards children who are particularly at risk. So, when I was mentioning that, we know from the general evidence that social skills training programs have reduced children's involvement in violence by 32%, and also their aggression by 28%. That's an average. If you then actually look at moderator analysis, it's the targeted programs with children who are already demonstrating a need for more intensive support that actually achieve greater impacts than some of those universal programs and more sort of primary prevention programs. When I say primary, I mean universal rather than primary or secondary school. So yeah, we'd really wholeheartedly support, children who've been involved in the youth justice system. We know that those children are most at risk of later involvement in violence and continued involvement in violence and offending, and targeted interventions that look to develop their social and emotional skills, we'd wholeheartedly support.
Thank you. And then another question we've had is a colleague's very interested in sort of work with much younger children, so they focused in on Key Stage 1, in fact. So are there surveys that explore changes in Key Stage 1 children's behaviour? And perhaps you might want to expand that out a little bit to sort of that younger primary age group, I guess.
Yeah, really good question. I've added just a link in response to that question in the chat. So I don't know about surveys specifically, but the guidance that the EEF has produced on primary SEL skill development is brilliant, and a lot of it is very much focused on Key Stage 1 children and how you develop some of these skills in Key Stage 1. The other thing to point to, I think, within the violence reduction evidence base is parenting programs. So parenting programs, family therapy programs, these are programs that also have an evidence base and that are often delivered with younger children. So nursery age children, Key Stage 1 children, and these are programs that have shown to have an impact on reducing children's behavioural difficulties, and we know over a longer period of time that can also reduce their involvement in violence. I haven't brought it to bear today because I think they're slightly more relevant for those younger children, but yeah, really good question.
Thank you. I'm going to keep coming at you with questions. We've got a few more, if that's okay. So can the EPIC tool, perhaps Ben, this is one for you, can the EPIC tool be applied to local authority children's services as well as school level?
Really good question. The answer is unfortunately no. The tool is targeted for education settings. However, we do have a children's services team at the YEF who are actually in the process of developing one, which I'm really happy to share. So that I think will likely come out later this year. Really happy to, I'll put my email in the response to that question, the Q&A. If you want to find out more, if you want me to connect you to a colleague, really happy to do that. And just to say, if there are any other colleagues that work across different sectors, we also have a self-assessment tool for the policing sector. I know that one has been developed for the youth justice sector. So it's a kind of a process that we're hoping to roll out across many of the different sectors.
And just to add to that there as well, and fantastic that we've got colleagues from Children's Services joining us here. We're actually, right now, we're writing the Children's Services practice guidance, you'll be delighted to hear. So we'll be publishing that in early June, and it will be set out in a very simple way, very similar to how you set out the education practice guidance, but it will be really targeted at Children's Services. And we'll talk about some of the things actually that we've discussed around parenting programs, but we'll also touch on some more sort of Children's Services related topics around extrafamilial harm, children in care, but that's coming in early June.
Thank you. Really good to know that's coming on board as well. Great question here about families. So how do we support families who might not have the capacity to develop those skills? I think a couple of times you referenced telling parents about the curriculum that you're delivering, getting them to pick that up at home, but how do you do that better if you have families that are struggling?
Yeah, another really fantastic question. And again, I'll defer to another fantastic guidance report that the EEF have produced. So the EEF have a fantastic guidance report on parental engagement, that really goes into detail on, how do you target, or how do you effectively work with parents? How do you communicate with them? How do you bring them on board with things like anti-bullying initiatives, social emotional skills development, and goes into that in a lot of detail. The other, as I said, like I think for those sort of families and children that you're particularly worried about, family therapy and family therapy interventions, and some of those children's services colleagues who are on the call will be very familiar with this this type of intervention. Again, those that is an intervention that has an evidence base for reducing children's behavioural difficulties. So yeah, I think those two resources in particular I'd flag to. But if you just Google EEF parental engagement guidance report, there's some fantastic resources in there.
Brilliant. I think that links to that previous question, doesn't it, about what's on offer to local authority children's services as well, because some of this will be things that can be delivered through universal support to families, which we're funding more of within the Department for Education. And then another question that we've got: are there specific SEL approaches that have been shown to work better with pupils at a high risk of exclusion or exploitation?
Yeah, another really good question. So we are not I mean, for us, the message would be those targeted programs. So it's really important to have a universal offer. But what we sometimes worry about, and we spoke a lot about this in the last session, that often the sort of discussion around suspension and exclusion really focuses on the decision point. Is a child suspended or excluded, and not on the support they receive after? And one of the really fantastic types of support you could provide to a child after they've been suspended and they return to the setting, or if they're in an AP setting, is a targeted social and emotional skills program. So, a program like Becoming a Man, a program that provides prolonged support, weekly support for at least a term, and explicitly developing those skills can be really impactful. Still important to do those universal things. Still important that those children, are going to PSHE lessons, receiving an RSHE curriculum, but ensuring they're receiving that targeted support is really important. Another interesting thing about sort of which children to target this to. Again, I'll go back to that 32% reduction in involvement in violence, and that being an average. One of the interesting things about the average is that we know that actually their programs are most impactful for children who are 9 or 10 years old. They're slightly less impactful for children who are younger, and slightly more for children who are older. I think part of that is as children get older, you become slightly more set in your ways in what some of the social emotional skills are. But really keen that we don't give the message there that once you get to that point, it's too late. Really important that we, hold the sort of premise of never too early, never too late for some of these interventions, and particularly as we're supporting really vulnerable children. But what I think that does speak to is that, early intervention is important here, and really supporting children who you might not think, oh, actually, they're not at immediate risk now of violence, to develop those skills over the long term.
Joe, thank you very much, and Ben as well. We've reached the end of the sort of submitted questions, and that's nicely bringing us to time as well. Can I say a very big thank you to both Ben and Joe for their input today? I found that incredibly useful. I hope you did too. We have our 4th session, and if you've enjoyed today, please do come and join us for that 4th session. Please do share details of it with any colleagues you think might also find that useful. It's on the 22nd of April on the screen there. I wonder as well if team we could just flick back to the QR code for the EPIC link as well, if anyone's got control, because if anyone didn't quite catch that, I would encourage you as a takeaway from today to think about signing up to the next session, and also having a go at completing the EPIC tool, and you'll get your freebie report at the end of that if you do that. Thank you most of all, colleagues, for your time today in joining us. I hope you found that really useful and helpful. There are links in the sidebar. I think when we get this up on YouTube, you'll be able to get into these slides, and you'll be able to follow further links that have been shared today. And of course, most of, or if not all of this, will also be on the YEF website as well. So there's infinite ways to find the resources that we've shared with you today. Colleagues, all the best for this evening. I hope those who are enjoying some sunshine and warmer temperatures can now go and enjoy that, and we'll see you hopefully at number 4 on the 22nd of April. Thank you very much.